Hey, students, it's activity number 3 for period 8, and we are going to kind of try to wrap up the Cold War. Period 8 ends in 1980. The actual end of Cold War is 1989, which would be a little bit more in period 9. So, kind of wrapping up the Cold War in a really odd place. I really think that period 8 should extend to 1989. That's where most historians kind of attribute the end of the Cold War with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Officially, the Soviet Union no longer calls itself the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where it's dominating other people, and it turns its name from the Soviet Union or USSR down to back to Russia. And that happens officially in 1991. So some historians will say that the actual end of the Cold War is 1991. Most historians kind of see the significance of the fall of the Berlin Wall, which kind of opened up the door towards Berlin being united, and then East and West Germany being united, and kind of doing democracy, and communism kind of falling backwards as the kind of end of the Cold War. So what we're going to talk about here is kind of the, again, continued buildup of military power between these. Really focus on nuclear power, and then obviously it's never used because we would have known about it. But the idea of just, there's this thing called détente, right? This idea that you're constantly checking the other one, and then you kind of ease relationships, but then you check, right? And kind of, so, that's what's kind of happening at this time. There's going to be kind of this, all these guys building up all this stuff, and they're going to try to check each other and kind of, well, we're going a little out of control. We don't need to have so many missiles to blow each other up 5 million times over. Let's chill out. So it's kind of like conversation of during this time between these kind of two groups. It's kind of interesting that they're at war, but yet they're trying to prevent war at the same time, or at least direct war. So one concern that kind of happens as we get into this is the hydrogen bomb. I believe the Russians kind of come up with the hydrogen bomb first, and it's just a much stronger version of a nuclear bomb. So kind of shows the different ones down here. But anyways, that's a little bit of a concern by the Americans. And what this begins showing is that Russia is catching up technologically. Right. At first, we were the only ones with a nuclear weapon. Now they have the H bomb, and it's going to increase even more. And it's going to become even more concerning. So, because of all these technological changes, the Americans go, "Oh my gosh, we need to have a stronger military to check them." Right. And so, you're going to be reading in this article how we began, increasing our arms, right, and trying to increase the amount of missiles, nuclear weapons, things to scare the Soviets because we're feeling a little concerned ourselves. It's very interesting. I think it's a very important speech. I think one that has really strong ramifications for our economy and our country today. But Eisenhower has his farewell address, and his farewell address you can actually see on TV, as you can see here. But he speaks to something called the military-industrial complex. The idea that the economy of the United States is beginning to be focused on war and the production of things for war. And he kind of, if we go back to the Great Depression and remind ourselves that really World War II is what got our factories cranking again. It really wasn't the New Deal. The New Deal and these kind of government efforts to get the country back together by spending money into the economy, something that we're actually doing right now during this COVID pandemic that we're experiencing right now by having the government give out money and spend money. That wasn't really working too well. It was really the war that kind of got in. And, today, some of the corporations that profit from war are like Kentucky Fried Chicken, Taco Bell, what's another one? Oakley for your sunglasses, Banana, I think it's not Banana Republic, Banana Sport, whatever, for suntan lotion. All of these, when you guys think of war, I think sometimes we only think about guns, but, you need laundry done, you need food out there. There are other supplies, earplugs, all types of different things that the United States Army, and not only just that, I mean, just think about weaponry and airplanes, right? And tanks and stuff like that. So these things cost a lot of money, and he begins being concerned that perhaps this military industrial complex, this reliance on the military to drive our economy is a concern. It's something that we should watch out for. And it shouldn't be so big that our economy is basically driven by warfare at certain levels. And this is kind of interesting too, because it's coming from a general, right? It's coming from a general who fought in World War II and helped orchestrate D-Day and taking back of Europe from Nazi Germany. So, that's what's another interesting moment of this is in interesting history is because it's coming from a trusted, well-known general who becomes elected president. Um, After Eisenhower, JFK comes in, and John F. Kennedy is during this time of suddenly the Russians are proving their success time and time again. They launch a satellite out into space, and it's called Sputnik. And the first one, all it did was just transmit, I think, a radio signal that's, hey, I'm out here. But then they began increasing it. And they've been sending animals up into space and having them return back. And so all of these kind of advances on Russian technology are concerning the Americans, like, oh gosh, we're falling behind. And that's exactly how they feel and they react. And so they began doing things. They began spending a lot of money on education, and so here I guess we'll talk about that now since it's here. But the idea is that, we're going to need to compete with these Russians who somehow have obviously better chemistry students than we do and physics students and all the things needed to get a rocket into space and launch a satellite. They can do better than us. So they've been investing a lot of money into our public education system and our college system. And because of that, we become the strongest, and still today, the strongest education system in the world. Another program that's created from that is NASA. NASA is no longer funded by the U.S. government. During Barack Obama's actually tenure, he stopped financing it. It's kind of privately financed at certain levels. And then they've done a partnership with, as you guys know, SpaceX, right? I mean, this is Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla. The CEO of Tesla also has another project called SpaceX. And their goal is to make, space travel a little bit more efficient, instead of having these rockets just fall off, they're kind of going back in. So today, NASA has merged with SpaceX, and their kind of focus is multiple things, including, having, actual, what do they call, like recreational or commercial flights to space. Commercial meaning you can buy it, just like you can go on a commercial airplane, you can go a commercial rocket and go visit space. So that's kind of their goal of what's going on. Out of this also comes the Apollo program by JFK, who promises to put a man on the moon, and we do, So the American system kicks in, right? We focus on our education. We are able to create the scientists, the wherewithal, the technology to go further than the Russians. And, this is a proud time for the United States as it has, caught up and even now surpassed back to that Russian power, that mental power that's out there. Another thing that we're going to be talking about is the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think it's best to kind of talk about it by a map. So that's what I'm going to do right now and kind of give you the story. So move this here. Oh boy. You might delete me, but it's more important that you see the map than you see me. So let's just talk about a couple things. First of all, we understand there's something called the Monroe Doctrine that once upon a time said, hey, Europe, stay out of Latin America. It is mainly a direction towards kings and queens to make sure that their colonies, when they took over, that there wasn't going to be territorial disputes between the United States, and also the promotion of democracy. Remember that Roosevelt, that's Teddy Roosevelt, not FDR. Teddy Roosevelt, the first one in the 1900s, the progressive president, also added something called the Roosevelt Corollary in his big stick diplomacy that said, walk softly. That means tell people what to do very softly, but carry a big stick. Don't use it, but you might use the American military to do it. And so these kind of ideas that Latin America is basically United States territory. We're not going to physically take it over, but nobody else can kind of screw with it. That mentality is definitely strong within the United States. And so this becomes an issue when Cuba is turned from a kind of democratic, it wasn't really democratic, a lot of people felt as corrupt country, into a communist country, which theoretically is just as corrupt. So, one guy that comes out of this right here that you can see right here is Fidel Castro. This guy right here. Fidel Castro is the leader of the communists who violently, in a revolution, take over the government and create this communist. Now, this is a massive problem because we have communists literally, what is that? I think it's like 300 miles away from the United States, something like that. So we got a serious issue going on that we have communists literally in our backyard. During this time, because of the communists coming in, and again, let me go ahead and kind of view in a little bit more. We send in a army over here to kind of stop this, and it's called the Bay of Pigs. And when it comes in, we're first of all, the Cubans know that they're coming. They're up on the hills while we're out in the ocean. We go in a low tide, and all of our ships get kind of wrecked on the low tide. It's just basically an abysmal failure underneath JFK's leadership, and it's not successful. The Bay of Pigs invasion is unsuccessful. And it was an effort to get this back into democracy and capitalism, away from communism. And you'll read the history why how Fidel Castro started linking up with the Soviets rather than the Americans. So this thing has kind of failed. So we already have Americans have tried once, basically, to come back into Cuba and switch it back from communism back to democracy and capitalism with the Bay of Pigs. So out of this now, Cuba is definitely very suspicious and very angered at the United States and sees them as an enemy, trying to send people in to overthrow their brand new created communist government. So the Soviets get wind of this, and the Fidel Castro is actually telling the Soviets, "Yo, we're communists here, and we need your help. Bring some stuff over." And so they began trying to help them over. And what really concerns the Americans is they're able to get some pictures, and they start seeing that Fidel Castro is building like missile sites to launch nuclear warheads. And again, look how close it is to the United States. So we could have nuclear warheads take out Florida. I mean, they were predicting to get nuclear warheads take out New York, right? That was kind of focus, or Washington D.C., right? Not good. And supposedly there's a carrier shipment of like missiles that are coming from Russia, all the way from Russia, and they're coming over here. And basically JFK contacts Russia and says, turn those ships back. You don't turn those ships back because I know they may have nuclear warheads on there, and go on here. And it goes there, it's on. Dude, we're going to have to fight. And out of this, the Cuban Missile Crisis is averted. The ships go back to Russia under Russia's command. This stays communist. America doesn't invade, but we get really, really close to having nuclear warheads here. And when that gets close, we're getting closer to using them as well. And so again, kind of talking about our last one, the 1950s, how there's just kind of all these mutual suspicions, right? So I don't know. I wasn't there in the 1950s. I don't know how people felt. Were people more glued to the TV and concerned about their own lives and what was going on? I guarantee when this first was broke out, there's definitely a lot of suspicion, a lot of concern, but definitely a historic event in which people heightened awareness about communism and what it could do got a little increased. All right, guys. Well, that's kind of the end, I believe. Oh, and then also the Vietnam War, which I deeply apologize. I don't have those things queued up. So, but I'll let you know exactly what this goes down. It is very similar to the South Korean War. So here we got Vietnam. Man, that's hard to see. Give me one more second. I apologize. Let's put Vietnam War map. Let's see if we can see something very simple, very easy. That's looking a little bit better. Cool. This might be actually a little better, kind of like that one. So just to talk about the history of Vietnam very quickly. Once upon a time, back before World War II, this is all owned by France. It's called French Indochina. And at the end of World War II, there's kind of this idea that everybody should kind of not have their colonies, and that's not, and kind of give them freedom, and that's not what the French want. And the French stay and kind of call this French Indochina, which frustrates a lot of the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese feel that they should have independence, and there's a lot of Vietnamese, just like Ho Chi Minh, that actually fought against the Japanese for the United States, and therefore for the Allies against the Imperial Japanese in Vietnam. And they felt they kind of got stabbed in the back here. Here you are fighting against the Japanese to get them out of your country, number one, but you're also helping the United States win and helping France and Great Britain theoretically win because they're ally of Germany. And here you're being taken back over by French, not Japanese, right? You can see the frustration that they would have. So the French, try to hold on for a long time. And also, if you ever know Vietnamese food, there's a lot of like baguettes there, and they're like sandwiches and stuff. I mean, there's a very strong French culture in there. So the French basically kind of are in the South more, and that becomes their little station. And the French don't do well. They lose a lot of Vietnam to now this group that are identifying themselves as communists, And if you look at Ho Chi Minh, who's the leader of, I'll Google him right now. If you look at Ho Chi Minh, who is the leader of the Vietnamese, and you look at his writings, he actually writes to the United States first for help for independence against France. And when that doesn't happen, then he goes, "Fine, I'll go to the Soviet Union." Like I wrote a paper about him, and the idea is that he was just looking for somebody to help him kick the French out and have independence for Vietnam. He would be considered for Vietnamese, theoretically, you might want to consider him a freedom fighter. And when he didn't get it from the United States, he looked to the Soviet Union. And you might be going, well, why didn't the United States just give them this land? It's French land, and I don't know if a colony and people that you don't really know and meet compared to your new friend against the Soviets called France and what they want. I'm sure you're going to give it something to your old friend before you give it to somebody you don't even know, right? So that's kind of an interesting part of history there. But Ho Chi Minh, who is up in the north, says, "Fine, we'll be communists," and he gets support from China, who are also communists. And you know the story now of the Cold War. We can't let that happen, and so a fight begins happening between these two areas. The United States is in the South, pretty much. This is largely Catholic speaking. They're largely democratic capitalist. One thing that's kind of a problem, and we'll see this again and again in U.S. history, is that we fight on the side of these groups, but their government isn't really that functioning. And that's going to be true of this government as well. You're going to learn that it's very corrupt in the South. So it's hard to really support a Southern government that's democratic and capitalist, yet still treats its people very bad and is very corrupt. It also talks about like the assassination and murdering of Buddhists that were down there. So just some really kind of bad things were happening towards that government. And here we're supporting that government. There's also stories of American soldiers like the My Lai massacre doing some really horrific things, massacring entire villages of Vietnamese who were unarmed women and children. Just really horrible things that happen in war. Another thing that happens, this is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and you can see it's kind of what we call against the rules of war. They're going out through Laos and Cambodia. And so what we began doing is we began doing a thing called carpet bombing, where we don't even know where things are. We just bomb this entire area, which is against the rule of war because we're bombing Laos and Cambodia. But that's what Ho Chi Minh was using, right? He was using what we call guerrilla tactics because the American military was so much stronger. He had to use these kind of we would say against the rules of war tactics to try to win. What's the story here? A bloody war between the North and the South. The South, just like in Korea, supported by the United States. The North being supported by the communists. And ultimately, the United States kind of supports the wrong government. And also, back at home, between hippies protesting and seeing these atrocities on their television screens, the American public begins losing their appetite for warfare. And what happens underneath Nixon is he's going to say, okay, we're going to slowly exit out. And he gets his troops out. And ultimately what happens is as they leave Saigon here in the South, like the North Vietnamese are right behind them and take out Saigon. So, American politicians at that time were looking for an honorable exit. Most historians would say this is a total military catastrophe and loss where we were in a war fighting on foreign land for things that really weren't of concern to the local population. So it's definitely a black eye on American history. It's definitely a little bit punch of a face to the American military, right? We come out of this one definitely a little bit more broken, and even domestic, right? Right? There's protests in the streets about this war, and our soldiers, as they return in the airports, are being called baby killers, even though they may not have a because of the relation to the My Lai massacre. There's not support for our troops. People are spitting at them. It's a very divisive part of America. I think something that we can relate to today. As the division between these different political groups that were happening, and this war spills back into the United States domestically as well. So a little history about the war, the Vietnam War, but once again, same story of the Cold War. We are not physically fighting directly Russians, but we are, what's interesting about this one too is the Russians were involved, was right, the Chinese, right? But the Chinese really weren't too involved as well. They're just supporting them with supplies. Really, it was North Vietnamese troops that were coming down, and also this insurgent group called the Viet Cong. That people that wanted Vietnam independence from France, and now from American independence and from this corrupt government, they would fight as well. So there's multiple reasons why we may have gone in here not truly understanding or appreciating the entire historical situation of what was going on. All right, guys. So that kind of ends the Vietnam War, which kind of ends the Cold War. The end of the story of the Cold War is that ultimately we are going to continue having conversations with the Soviet Union, and after the Vietnam War, we're going to kind of move into a place where we're having meetings with China, having meetings with Soviet Union, and eventually the Soviet Union will allow free elections. And theoretically we won the Cold War, or maybe Russia gave up the Cold War, maybe because we outspent them, maybe because we outthought them, maybe we just spent more military, on them that they never wanted to. For whatever, there were multiple reasons, right? That could have been the reason for the end of the war and kind of the outcome of the United States once again, just like World War II and probably World War I, reemerging as a world power. All right, guys. The next unit we'll talk about is kind of what's happening inside the United States domestically during these times. Kind of focus on our economy, and then we'll keep on marching through period 8 with a little bit more focus towards civil rights and minorities. All right, take care, guys. Bye.